Welcome Professor Leo for the first talk. You have 30 minutes and then we'll follow.
Okay, so thank you very much to Ashish for the very kind invitation and to all your organizing team who have done a fantastic job of making it so hospitable for us. It's been fantastic. I took the liberty of changing the title on reflection of the audience. I thought I'd pull some early work that we've done when we first started the acoustics. Mainly because there's still some open questions and unsolved challenges that I'm hoping that the clever people in this room will help us to answer. Because when we first started, there was no theories to at least define what we saw, the phenomenon we saw. So I'll try to tell you some of these things. So before I start, that's where we are at the bottom end of Australia. It's a long way from anywhere, so hopefully to save me from getting on planes, it'll be good if more of you come to visit. So it'll be... That's where we are. Before I start, let me just acknowledge the people who do the real work. For what I'm going to tell you today, it's been done with a collaborator, a long-term collaborator of mine, James Friend, who is at UC San Diego now for quite a few years. Amgad Rez is a senior collaborator, and two very talented postdocs who have now gone on to their own careers. Haiyan Li, who is at Shanghai Jiao Tong, and Ofer Manna, who's a very talented associate professor now at Technion. Okay, so this slide probably sums up all the work that we do in our lab, and it's quite diverse. More recently, we've been dabbling around with nanomaterials and bulk crystals as well, and also more in the cells, the mechanobiology, and the tissue engineering stuff. But really, what's the core or bread and butter of what we do centers around these sound waves. They are a bit different from what you probably heard before. So these are Rayleigh waves. So unlike bulk waves which go everywhere, these are localized on the surface. All right, and I'd like you to just bear in mind these magic numbers, okay? So the frequency is about 10 megahertz, all right? And that translates into wavelengths that are order of 100 microns, okay? So just keep those in mind because what you'll see some, the traverse of the scales in the phenomena. I'll give you some examples. I mean, this is recent work that we've done, right, in materials. We started off with fluids, and this is when I started on my career about 10 to 15 years ago. And, when you couple these sound waves, these high-frequency sound waves into fluids, well, when we first started, we see all kinds of new phenomena, all right? And maybe that's because nobody's crazy enough to couple megahertz order, stuff, or at least 10 megahertz and beyond into these fluids. And we saw that the classical theories don't, sometimes they don't really hold, and becomes very, very non-linear. And so we've been spending, 10 years trying to pull out our hair and figure out what's going on. And more recently, we did the same with materials. And again, we see all these new phenomena that we can't explain. And it really goes across scales, right? For example, you've got these 100 micron wavelengths, right? But then we see molecular orientation. So if you look at, for example, when crystals, when crystallization occurs in the acoustic forcing, you see, for example, under XRD, 111, 222, 333, 444, it's all very oriented. Now, why would 100 micron wavelengths order and molecular scale, right? This is like 5 orders of magnitude or more. So, it's still much a mystery to us. I mean, cells as well. I mean, recently we've been, looking at mechanobiology, and why would cells, and I'll show you there's no cavitation in these systems, right? And so no poration, and yet we can modulate, ion fluxes in and out of the cell. We can, then trigger all kinds of downstream signaling cascades and cellular fates. But that's probably a story for another day. I'm going to focus more on the fluids. And again, as I've said, there's unlike conventional, say, ultrasound, or and there's a whole field of sonochemistry that's primarily driven by cavitation. We almost always never see cavitation. Okay, and nobody believes me when I say that because cavitation is very, very hard to measure, right? So I decided I won't do it myself. I'll give it to the cavitation experts, and they didn't believe me either. So these are people who spend their whole lives measuring cavitation, and they look at sonoluminescence, sonochemiluminescence, and sure enough, they couldn't find any cavitation. So what's driving all the phenomena? All right, for a long time, you can expect that it's mechanical forcing, right? Because the accelerations, okay, so remember I said 10 megahertz, okay? Now, the amplitude of these surface waves, okay, and I'll come back to that in a moment, the surface wave amplitude is about 10 nanometers, okay? It goes up and down 10 nanometers, 10 million times a second, right? What's the acceleration? It's 10 million Gs, all right? So it's a great way of driving fluid motion and all, and for a long time we focus on that mechanical forcing. But more and more so, I begin to realize that there's also that electric field, and that could be quite substantial, so much so that we see a lot of effects, okay? And I don't have time to tell you all about it, but I just wanted to drive home this message that it's not, well, at least for these systems, is not good enough just to just look at that mechanical effects. The electric field plays a strong role as well, and we see all kinds of static and dynamic charging. We can generate free radicals, inject charges, and generate charges, right? So if you're interested, we've got this paper on actually free radical generation without cavitation. We can break or split water. And not only that, we can also break water's tetrahedrally coordinated. We can break the bonds between the water molecules. And so they're more readily accessible, these free water to electrodes. And we've shown that actually enhances water splitting or electrochemistry by about 10-fold. And that's quite unexpected. But for today, what I'm going to focus on is, because of the audience, these fluid phenomena that we did early on. And in some ways, it's an old field. A lot of these fluid structural interactions, they're actually, well, there's a bit of a difference because a lot of that work has been really in flow-induced vibration, right? So there's this whole turbulence community. You have these bluff bodies where the flow goes over and you get these fluid structures. But here, it's a bit different. We're inducing flow using vibration. So there's subtle differences, but still, it's a very, you've got esteemed people that have gone way and done all these classical theories. So I'm standing on shoulders of giants, but most of these have been primarily limited to very low frequencies, all right? Hertz order, or at most kilohertz order, and I'm sure you recognize all these names here. Just to backtrack a bit, these are the kind of forcing that we play around with, what's known as surface acoustic waves. Some of you would probably know about it. Think of it as 10 nanometer amplitude earthquake waves, okay, that traverse a piezoelectric substrate. So that's the chip. We pattern these finger-like transducers, and just like the shifting of tectonic plates gives rise to an earthquake, you put an AC field, and that vibrates the fingers and launches mechanical strain along the surface of the piezoelectric chip. Right, so the earthquake goes back and forth this chip. The width and gap of these fingers sets the wavelength and hence the resonant frequency. And you probably hear me harping on about it. That's about 100 microns, and so you've got a 10 megahertz wave that comes out. Okay, that's not the only kind of wave we play around with. We discovered that there's a funny asymptotic sort of intermediate regime between the pure surface wave and the Bolt waves, right? The way I think about it is surface waves, for a surface wave to exist, right, the penetration of the energy has to be localized on the surface, okay? So if I can think about just very hand-wavingly, the energy is on the order of like over a characteristic length scale of a wavelength, okay? So for a surface wave to exist, the wavelength has to be much less than the thickness, okay? And the thickness of the chip. So the thickness of the chip here, we use standard chips, so that's about 500 microns. So if it's 100 microns, you have sort of like, you're almost bordering on a surface wave, right? And for a Bolt wave, the energy has to traverse through that thickness of the material. Okay, so you've got the other, asymptotic regime where h over lambda is less than 1. But in between, nobody's played around with that, and and when we see we use the wrong frequency, not by clever design, but we just 10 megahertz, we'll get these surface acoustic waves. But actually, when you measure it, it's not a surface wave, neither is a Bolt wave. Okay, so we use laser Doppler vibrometry to actually see what's going on. On the top of the chip, you see these surface waves as you see here. If it's a pure surface wave, then if you look underneath the chip, you shouldn't see anything, and that's here, right? You don't see any vibration. But you see this really it's neither here, neither there. You see surface waves on the top. At the bottom, you see this Bolt wave. So it's quite interesting. This is at 10 megahertz. When you go high up, then you get a pure surface wave. And I don't think very many people realize that you have this weird hybrid in between. But it still behaves like a surface wave. So we actually launch it as a surface wave, but because the energy or the wavelength is matched to the thickness, it goes through the backside and reflects off. So for lack of better name, I could have named it Leslie waves, but then be stoned for heresy. So we call it, which is on hindsight a misnomer because it didn't mean anything, surface reflected Bolt waves, whatever that is. But at least I hope to get you to appreciate that it's not so clear cut that there's just Bolt or surface waves. Okay, and you have to be careful with that frequency wavelength thing. In any case, whether it's a surface wave or this hybrid wave, if you launch it and it meets a liquid, then because of the mismatch in sound, the sound velocity in the solid and the liquid, the wave always turns into the phase with the lower sound speed. Right, and so it will leak out all its energy, and it turns at this Rayleigh angle, which is the ratio between the two sound speeds. And when it leaks out all its energy, it generates this streaming that you've heard all about, right? And if you have a drop that sits there at low powers, it just vibrates. There's all kinds of implications for that, which I'll tell you about. And then you can do all kinds of particle patterning and sorting that you've heard from previous talks. You can also drive droplet motion and do drop splitting and things like that. If you keep going up in power, you can pull out these centimeter-long jets from millimeter-sized drops without any nozzle. So we're looking at that for bioprinting. Then you can, at the high power, you just blow everything up and nebulize. All right, so there's all kinds of things that you can play around with. You can pump like crazy if you cut channels into the substrate, or if you break symmetry, you can generate a microcentrifuge. Right, but that's stuff that for another day. What I'll try to tell you about is new phenomena that we see that when we first, and when my students first showed us these things, we were like, what? So there was an interesting phenomena that sort of happened without explanations at that time. I don't know whether I'll get through all of this, but I'll certainly try to tell you about the first two. Okay. So I guess I've got the luxury of the previous speakers and Professor Laurel's the expert in this area. You've heard all about how particles, when you, for example, got a standing wave, right? Particles migrate to the nodes or the antinodes depending on that contrast factor, and Professor Fisher has also really showed us what can be done with all this, the beauty of that, the acoustic holograms and things like that. So I won't need to explain all this to you, but there's a long history in that. The Chladni patterns, as you know, Ernst Chladni in 1800s. So it goes back a long way, and then you've got these Kunz tube experiments looking at longitudinal standing waves where they use that to measure the speed of sound in a tube, right? So it's not new phenomena, but okay, so here's what we saw, right? So here's the drop sitting there, okay? Sessile drop sitting on the substrate. The acoustic wave is going underneath that drop, and it sets up this standing wave pattern, okay? So let me try to tell you what happens, okay? So in this drop, there are fluorescent particles, okay? Just to visualize what happens. And if you, let's go across here, okay? So fixed diameter. So at low powers, and when there's not much streaming, you get these fingerprint-like patterns on the drop, okay? Concentric fingerprint patterns. But when you go up in power and the streaming just starts, of course you know that streaming is going to wipe out the particle assemblies, okay? There's dispersion happening. You get these islands happening, right? And I'll show you these islands will evolve in number, right? And then, but that's still relatively quiescent, right? And when you keep going, so going from A to B, now to C, you get the islands now dispersing, but then they stop. And then they reform again, and then there's a counterflow that disperses them, and this back and forth cycle, right? And at the high power spectrum, you get this centrifugation effect that just, just wipes out everything, okay? So let me try to, take each regime in turn and piece together something, but, you'll see that, it's only part of the story, okay? So these concentric fingerprint-like patterns, what's happening? Okay. Well, firstly, we note that the separation between the rings are about 100 microns. So that's roughly half a wavelength. Okay. And that's here we have 20 megahertz vibrations, so that's consistent with what's on the substrate. And that's what you would probably expect, right? That and we try to measure this the spectra of the waves, at least on the substrate, as well as the capillary, the free surface, right? So we back out the laser focal point to here. And you can see that this is the measurement as we back out on the laser focal plane. You get a very strong 20 megahertz signal, okay? On the substrate as you expect, because that's the surface acoustic wave, 20 megahertz. But if you back it out to the interface at this point, you see two signals, right? One at 20 megahertz, but also one at just about roughly 1 kilohertz, right? So there's definitely two things going on. But here at this point in time, the dominant one appears to be the 20 megahertz as well. So it's this sort of harmonic excitation on the free surface. Now that itself is a controversy, right? Because we know from Faraday's theory that if you excite a surface at 20 megahertz, at the free surface, you should get 1/2 subharmonic parametric excitation. So it should be 10 megahertz. But we never ever, we don't ever see this 1/2 subharmonic, okay? If I have time, I'll show you the actual measurements. And, but that's a open question. Why when I was young and naive, I used to go around saying, oh, Faraday must be wrong, right? And then I get stoned. So now I'm a bit more, diplomatic. I'll say maybe Faraday missed something. But anyway, these finger-like print patterns are essentially what's the 20 megahertz signal. How do they assemble into there? It's not unlike what Professor Laurel probably has shown you, or particle patting and nodes and antinodes. But here the capillary motion comes into play. And there's this nice paper by Gregory Felkovich in Nature in 2005, which explains this particle drift mechanism, how they actually go into these nodes along the waves, right? And because the drop is a circle, you expect them to be concentric because it's like this resonant cavity, right? Felkovich theory actually has two mechanisms, or at least two dominant forces. One is the surface acceleration of that capillary wave vibration, and also the surface tension. Okay, so he suggested that the drift force, okay, that pushes the particles into these nodes or antinodes, goes as the square of the amplitude. All right, so if I assume that I can balance that with Stokes drag, hand waving, then I should get that inverse time it takes for the particles to go in that goes as the square of the amplitude. And this is what we see. So that at least lends a bit of confidence that, this particle drifting mechanism might be at play. Right? But what's the interesting part is when you actually turn up the power, the drop starts to vibrate more, and you go into this this new regime where the fingerprint-like patterns give way to islands, all right? And you can actually count the islands, right? And why do they appear, right? So we think that now you've got the other mode coming in, the low-frequency mode. So at I told you those concentric fingerprint patterns are these standing waves on the free surface of the drop at 20 megahertz, right? Now you've got overlaid on top of that the low frequency 1 kilohertz vibration or resonance, and that takes the form of like this breathing mode of the drop, right? So you've got this overlaid onto this ring-like mode, this breathing-like mode. And wherever you got an intersection between the, I've drawn this straight, right? But, obviously because it's like a lens-like effect, so it's a bit more curved. But just for simplicity, so you got the 20 megahertz waves, right? And where they intersect with this 1 kilohertz ring, you get an island forming, okay? So that's well, I think you will agree that that's reasonable to assume, right? Why is this 1 kilohertz mode? Well, if you balance capillary and viscous forces, you get this capillary viscous stress resonance that's of order 1 kilohertz. Now, is it capillary viscous or capillary inertia? So I had this when I first presented this way long time back ago. Howard Stone was in the audience, and he said, "Nah, you can't do that, right? Capillary force is stabilizing, viscous force is stabilizing." Right? So I thought, okay, well, it's Howard, right? So you can't argue with him. But then the more, so he said it has to be capillary inertia, right? Which, okay, if you do the balance, you get something similar as well. It's order of magnitude, right? But the more I think about it, it's not so straightforward, because that's true in a normal system. But in acoustics, right, the viscous force is not just stabilizing. It's not only dissipative, because you need viscosity to absorb the wave to drive the flow. So who wins out? It's not that clear, right? But I'll just put it here that it can be capillary viscous, it can be capillary inertia. Well, I don't know, but it's the same. Whatever it is, it's the same particle drifting mechanism that drives the particles into those islands here. But watch this, okay? So if you sit here and watch the video long enough, you'll see that the islands actually move and they combine, right? So over a span of 30 seconds, just to speed this up, you get like 10 islands to 9 to 8 to 7 to 6 to 5, right? And I'm not doing anything. The drop is just sitting there. The wave is on, but these islands are just, decreasing in number, right? And well, what we think is happening is that the drop's evaporating. Okay? So when the drop size decreases, okay, that ring is still there, that ring-like mode, but every time it decreases beyond, a wavelength, you lose one intersection, and you lose another intersection, lose another intersection. So that's why you lose that island. Okay? So that also is reasonable. Now here's the part where, I like your help with, because it's been, when we published the paper, 2008. I have 15 years on, I don't know why this is happening. Okay? So here's the island. Now we're going into this regime where now the flow becomes dominant. Okay? And flow will wipe out the islands. Okay? And if you see this video long enough, the islands form, and then the flow disperses them. Okay? I should really speed up the videos. But you'll see that, okay, so the flow is starting now, and it wipes out the islands. And then you'll find that the flow then stops. Again, I'm not doing anything. I'm just letting it do what it... See, it stops, and then the islands reform, and then after a while, the flow starts again. But now, it goes, sometimes it's clockwise, sometimes, so it went clockwise, I think, the last round. It'll go anti-clockwise. So it goes in this cycle, clockwise, stop, anti-clockwise, stop. Okay? There, it's going anti-clockwise now. So, this is still an open question that I'm sure there's lots of more clever people than me in this room. Okay, so I'll leave it as that. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to move away from a drop to a film, right? And we see, equally puzzling things that, needs well, some explanation. Again, lots of people, acoustic streaming, streaming's not a new thing. Okay. But let me stop this video and then, so you saw an initial drop, okay? So we've got a fluorescent dye there. So the brighter that dye, the thicker it is, okay? So the waves are going from your left to your right, okay? The waves are going this way. Okay, it's I'll rewind it and you'll see it. So what you'll notice is that firstly that drop, I wish I had the controls. The drop is going to be pushed in the direction of the wave. Okay, and then it leaves behind a trailing film, and that trailing film is going to move opposite to the direction of the wave. And as it moves, it creates this instability in its front. And then what you'll see is these. Well, is it drops? Is it solitary waves? It's more solitary waves, I think, because it's part of that film. It's going to move it back in the direction of the wave propagation. Okay, so you can see it, and so drop gets pushed, film goes in the opposite direction, and you get these solitary, like hums that go back in the opposite direction. Okay, and what I'll do is show you from the side. Big drop goes direction of the wave, pulls out this thin film. I'll try to focus. You can see a bit of the capillary ridge of the advancing front, and you see these solitary like waves that go in the opposite direction. Okay, so okay, I've got 5 minutes. Now I should mention that these are low surface tension fluids, okay, silicon ore, but they have fairly high viscosity. Ashish has discovered that if you use low viscosity, you see a completely different phenomena. I think Niladri has a talk later on. Go to his talk, you'll see something completely different. All right, but same kind of wave excitation. Okay, so now I think it's now it comes back to length scales again. All right, so if you have the conventional streaming mechanism is this, what's known as Eckert streaming. And just to be very quick, when this occurs over a length scale corresponding to the sound wavelength in the fluid. Okay? So when you have a system length scale, like the drop is big enough to support, the sound waves in the fluid, right? Then Eckert streaming is that leakage of that sound wave into the drop that drives this momentum flux, right, due to viscous attenuation, all right? And that pushes the drop expectedly in the direction of the wave propagation. Okay, and then at the other end, end of the spectrum, you've got, everyone knows boundary layer streaming. Okay, when you've got this boundary layer thickness, okay, that's order about probably sub-micron or just a bit below. Okay, but that doesn't explain why we have that thin counter-propagating thin film, because if you look at the drift from the boundary layer drift, that Stokes drift, it should also occur in the direction of the wave propagation. So there's this intermediate regime that when you have things on the order of just above the boundary layer thickness, that I'll try to piece together what's happening, all right? So just at that leading edge of the drop, again, this is why the surface tension is important. So if I assume that this contact angle is a wedge, right? So just again, hand waving, theta is roughly h over L, right? So if I have, like, water, I don't see this, okay? I see the drops just moving, as you saw in that the video, you know, that the drops were just translating, okay? Because water has high surface tension, high contact angle, so there's enough sort of like height for the wave to leak in, right? Now, if I make it very small contact angles, low surface tension, then at least on the leading, that contact line region, I don't have enough room for even a wavelength to support, you know, leakage of that energy. Okay, and that's why these films form under low surface tension. Okay, for those of you who like all these kind of things, which I can appreciate, there are some of you in the room, we tried to, you know, put together a theory, and, you know, for those of you who like equations here, I don't have time, so I'm just going to skip all this, but the key thing is there's some small parameters that you can do expansions in, and two of them is the boundary layer thickness to the wavelength is a small parameter, and also this Mach number, it's also a small parameter, the characteristic velocity over the sound speed, right? Two small parameters, then you can express everything in terms of stream function, the mass and momentum conservation, the governing equations is stream function equation, and then you can do the asymptotic expansion. To leading order, everything cancels, and that's because the wave, okay, on that surface acoustic waves behave like a retrograde motion. So if you sit on the surface, as the wave comes, just like your buoy on a water, in the ocean waves, you go up and down, but you're elliptical, all right? And so if you look, they cancel each other out, right? So to leading order, there's this vanishing contribution, but to next order, you have actually a drift, okay? And without trying to go into all the details, you can do the thin film lubrication type equations, do mass conservation through a kinematic equation, and derive a volumetric flow rate that contributes of the usual longitudinal pressure drop flux. And you've got this, this Rayleigh streaming component that actually drives the flow in the opposite direction. Just to be quick, just to validate this, we can measure that front of the propagating film, and we can collapse everything. It goes quite linearly. The front goes with time. All right, so that gives at least some confidence that we can explain something. Now, the last part, I'll end, okay, is where you get this fingering-like instability of the film, and you get these solitary waves or solitary humps, I would say, in the counter-propagating direction. Now, is this Marangoni? Well, I don't think it is. It's not gravity either, because we turn the chip upside down and we still see it. It actually has to do with something with the underlying transducer. Okay, because remember, these surface acoustic waves are generated with finger-like electrodes. That finger-like electrodes actually is a diffraction grating. So you actually see the diffraction being mimicked on the overlying acoustic wave, that instability. And it sort of mimics the kind of Fresnel patterns that you see in conventional optics. And the closer you are to the fingers, the electrodes, you get very sort of narrow patterns. And the further you are, you get this coarse fingers. And that's consistent with conventional optical theory of Fresnel to Fraunhofer like diffraction patterns. Okay, sorry, I'm going a bit fast because I'm out of time. So that probably explains the instability. Now, what about those humps that you saw that go in the opposite direction? Okay, so you've got this parent drop which goes in the direction of the acoustic wave. You got the counter-propagating thin film that I've told you about already. Now, at the leading edge of that, you got this capillary ridge that everyone would expect, right? Now, what happens is when it gets close to the electrode, okay, remember the electrode is here to launch the acoustic waves, it stops, right? Now, as it stops, if I arrest the flow, and I think about this as a control volume, there's still flow coming in from the film. Now, it's going in, and if you think about this control volume, this ridge has to grow because it can't move, right? So as it grow, it grows up. Now, as it grows up to about the wavelength, what happens? Now you've got back this Eckert streaming, right? You can support the sound wave leakage again into the film, and so it then pushes it back in the opposite direction. Now, just to prove it, I can draw the control volume here. I know the flux coming in because I've got that theory, those thin film equations that I showed you before, those ugly, math. I know the velocity coming in. So if I draw the control volume, I know how much volume I have in time. And if I set this as a criterion, as the critical height before it leaves, then I can actually count the number of growth of these solitary waves before they leave. And sure enough, they match this, at least the counts that we see, right? So this is what we see, and this is that control volume theory, and you see good match between that. So I'll leave it as that. It becomes even more interesting because we actually discover if you go thinner, you've got, again, not only a counter-propagating film, you've got another film that goes in the direction, again, below the boundary layer thickness. And that's the shifting streaming and stuff like that, which I'll leave for another day. So with that, I'm going to end here. Thank you very much. I hope that inspires some thought to the kind of things that we haven't explained. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Leslie. So we have time for a couple of questions. Yeah.
Sir, I have a small question. As in seen various experiments, if I have a super hydrophobic surface and we can manipulate droplet with various external forces like electric field, magnetic field, depends on the droplet which type of. In case of electrowetting and dielectric, there is I have a problem of contact angle saturation. That is if the droplet is super hydrophobic, that cannot go in a hydrophilic state, super hydrophilic. That at a certain contact angle that will saturate. Is such contact angle saturation also occur in acoustic wave too?
The short answer is I don't know. I've not studied that, but I don't want to steal his thunder. I believe I was talking to one of Ashish's students. They're studying that, so this is your man. All right. I don't want to steal his thunder. I have my speculations, but I think he's measuring that. So you can talk to him.
Any other questions?
Okay. I used it loosely, right? So it's the interactions between the surface, that vibrating surface where the acoustic wave is propagating, and the flow. That exactly. Yeah. That's why I said the difference is the flow-induced vibration or vibration-induced flow. So here we are doing vibration-induced flow. So sorry, I'm a bit loose with terminology.
Okay, if there are no more questions, let's thank Professor Leslie. We have a token of appreciation.